I love talking about African wildlife above all. And so my whole program today is to introduce you to what I know about African wildlife and some of the experiences we've had as we've traveled through Africa. We've been to several places now, over 3 or 4 visits. You know, when I was a youngster, I was always a biologist, right from day one. And there was a certain period of my life when I started watching Tarzan movies. Do you remember Johnny Weissmuller? Okay, do you remember this? I loved that. That became my trademark. I'd go around the house. I'm sure my parents appreciated it after a couple of months. But you know, I often think I was born 20,000 years too late, because I often talk about megafauna. Wherever we travel around the world, Australia had giant lizards, megafauna. North America had giant camels, a giant sloth, 12 feet high. But the wonderful thing is we come to Africa and the megafauna is still here. Fantastic. So at some points I realized, no, I prefer living today, actually. It would have been a wild time back in those days, 20,000 years ago. So it's an immense privilege for myself and my wife and I to travel the world and go to these places and see wildlife. But I think you'll soon learn that Africa is a special place. Nothing here is predictable. So you'll have experiences, I'm almost certain, that you'll have experiences that will surprise you when we arrive in Africa. Come for the wildlife, stay for the exercise. Well, you know, I'm an amateur photographer, and that's one reason I love Africa. I come here with my camera, and there's always some kind of spectacular wildlife or phenomenon, natural phenomenon that I can photograph. But you know, these days, people are so inured to good photography because of Sir David Attenborough bringing you this incredible vision of the natural world on our televisions. So it's very difficult to compete. You know, he can travel the world and bring you visions and photography that I would just dream of. So he knows all the tricks. Well, you know, I've come across something that really impresses people. I put my photographs on Google Maps, and I don't know what it is. I get millions of views. So these are 360-degree photographs, and I have a special camera. One click, and it takes a 360 view. So I put these up on Google Maps, and now I get 100,000 views a month. I've had 90 million views. I'm kind of wondering, gee, I wish I had a penny for view or something. But I want to show you what a 360 photograph is. So it's like I'm inside a bubble, and I fly around inside this bubble, and all of this information, this digital view, is contained in one photograph. This is a monastery just outside of Athens. But I think it's quite amazing that you can capture all of this with one click of a 360 camera. So you might see me, in the old days I used to do this with my telephone, and I'd have to take every little inch, and it would take me a couple of minutes, and people would wonder, what's this guy up to? But now I have this camera that does it with one click. Well, who wants to join me for a safari? Good stuff, because I'm going to take you on safari. And what I love about safari is, look, can you see the lion there? Well, the lions are all around us. And there we are, very close. You get an opportunity when you're on safari to get a really beautiful close-up view of antelope, of water buffalo, of just amazing creatures that it's like you're part of a National Geographic feature. And we've had several of these opportunities. So I want to take you on to 3 different types of safaris that we've experienced. But before we go on safari, I want to show you this. Whatever you do, do not do this, because this is trouble. Whatever is chasing you, you will not outrun it. So do not run. So I'm sort of half in jest. But, you know, when I was with national parks in Canada, we would tell people every day, if you see a grizzly bear, do not run. Well, this is another story, but I'll tell you, I saw a grizzly bear, and my brain was telling me do not run, but my legs weren't listening. Well, so I have 3 experiences to tell you about. In the Okavango, we went on a private safari, and they had a tent for us. It was just my wife, Jan, and I on this very interesting private safari. Balule was a private game reserve, and it's one of these ones that's right beside Kruger National Park, and there's no fence. They've taken the fence down, so it's all integrated, one giant national park, really, with a private game reserve. And then I'm going to tell you about Kruger itself, Kruger National Park. And I think it's just a fantastic opportunity for someone, almost anyone, to be able to witness some of these animals that I'm talking about. So we're going to start off in Botswana. And the Okavango, if I'm sure you've heard of it, is really quite an amazing place, because what it is a river delta of the Okavango River flowing into the Kalahari Desert. It's the only one like this that I know of, where a river flows into a desert and seasonally creates the flooding of the Okavango. So this is a fantastic place to see wildlife. So this is what it looks like when it's greened up during the flood period. Starts around now. And the waters come in, and of course the game comes to follow the water. They show up in mass. You have huge herds of zebra and wildebeest, all of these creatures showing up to take advantage of this. So it goes from roughly 4,000 square kilometers to 12,000 because of the water inundating this area. Begins in March and peaks in July. So it would be now that we already have the beginning of this season. So when you go to this part of the Okavango, you go in the canoe called the Makoro. And I have some photos to show you. This is how you get around in the Okavango. They pole you on these Makoro canoes up through the river. And there's just an incredible network of channels going through the reeds. And this is on our safari. This fellow, he had all of the tent and cooking supplies and everything in that canoe while we were being pulled along in our canoe in the Makoro. It was just spectacular. And the wildlife here is just, that's the reason that we're here. It's just bird life and animal life that you wouldn't believe. So here's a little video of us exploring the Okavango on a Makoro. We were very fortunate. We had this most beautiful weather. But you know, the very first day when we arrived, and we had only been in the Makoro for maybe 45 minutes, an hour, these black clouds started showing up. And I had this feeling like, uh-oh, something is up here. There's a storm brewing. Sure enough, this is what it looked like. And before you knew it, our guide, his name was Scar, he had one eye. I didn't get into the story, really. He was a fantastic fellow, but he saw that there was a huge downpour coming, so he quickly whipped us right into the reeds, and he managed to, at risk to his own personal bedding or his sleeping bag, he put up this tent for us, and he quickly got us inside. A huge downpour came down, and the canoe was half full of water. I didn't realize it, but his sleeping bag got wet. But after that, it was over in maybe 10-15 minutes, and we were back on the canoe and heading to, it turned out it was like our own huge private island in the Okavango. So they pulled us up with the canoes, and that was our campsite. We stayed there on this island. There were no other people anywhere around. This was a beautiful place for bird photography. I'll show you some of the wildlife pictures that we took. There's a kingfisher. And anyone who is interested in biology, I think at some point should be coming to Africa for these kinds of experiences. Well, you know, in the Mokoro, they were afraid. And I was very surprised. Our guide, Scar, he was not kidding. He was nervous as we were being pulled up the channel. And it's because of this. Now, you'll recognize this. Any guesses? So that's a hippo. The hippo is literally the most dangerous animal in Africa. And these villagers who live here in the Okavango have lost family and friends because of the hippo. The hippo is not mean. It's not out to get you, but you have to be very, very careful. So what looks to us like a channel in the Okavango is a hippo highway. That's why it's there. It's not because of the people with the Mokoro canoes. The hippos. And I don't think we appreciate, I borrowed this from BBC, but you know, we don't appreciate the role that the hippo plays in this Okavango environment. They go underwater and they walk along the bottom. So they're walking along these channels down there with the fish. The thing is, when you're in the canoe up above, you don't even know that there's hippos down below you. And they surface. Do you see the hippo there? Suddenly they can surface under your canoe. And that's the problem. So the villagers have some way of, they'll be passing one another and telling one another which channel has the hippo that you have to watch out for, or the family of hippos. And there was one point where Scar suddenly took off the main channel and sort of pushed himself through the reeds, and it was because there was a hippo in the main channel. And when you look at that, you realize these hippos are walking along the bottom. Now, I have to tell you, Scar said to Jan and I, if the hippo surfaces underneath and we are overturned, don't swim. And I said, what? Yeah, he said, don't swim. As you thrash along the top, the hippo will come and get you. So what you have to do is crawl quietly through the reeds and get out without making any splashing. I said, sure, yeah. I'm going to have a heart attack and sink like a stone. So that's what they're worried about. They're not nasty creatures, but they don't like people sharing the water with them. And they particularly don't like anyone getting between them and the water. And if they have a calf, don't get between them and the calf. And you know, I'm saying this sort of half in jest, but no kidding. You have to be very careful if there are hippos around. The villagers, often they have to go out, fetch water, or go from one village to the next. These hippos go many, many miles during the night. And the problem is the villager can end up in a situation where they're between the hippo and the water without planning. And that can be a dangerous scenario. Okay. So, this is Scar, and Jan and I. And on this island, this is the camp. Now that flat surface is the Makoro canoe, turned upside down. And that actually became a big work table. And that's where they prepared all the meals. It was quite impressive what they could do. So there we were in a bush camp, in a tent, and every night, Scar, and then we had a cook and 2 young people to help with the camp. Scar would say, whatever you do, when you go into the tent for the night, stay in the tent. Because we were in the middle of lion country and hippo country and you name it. So, and there was no fence around. So we literally, if we got into the tent, we stayed there for the night. Because he had some stories. One gentleman, for example, wanted to take photographs early in the morning, and his son woke up and he was gone. Turned out he'd gone out and met up with a water buffalo, and unfortunately was killed. So this is our camp, and you know, I don't know if they invented these names, but our cook was called Baker. And at least that's what he told us. So he would cook on this open flames, and he had these really old pots, but he would cook incredible stews and bread even in these cooking pots. I was just amazed what he could come up with. Every day it was something delicious. So this is the countryside on the island, and Scar would take us for walks. And at night I would hear the lions. And the first thing in the morning I would say, Scar, I heard lions last night. How close are they? And he would just say, oh, no, don't worry. They're a couple kilometers over that way. I know where they are. And Scar, you know, when you go to a national park or a private game reserve and you're out of the Jeep, which you shouldn't be, they'll carry a rifle. All Scar had was a water bottle in his back pocket. And we'd hike for hours through lion country, and I was a little bit nervous. But you know, Scar, he was never nervous except for those hippos in the canoe. And then one time we were hiking. After a couple hours, we came up across a steaming mound. And it looked like a big cow pie. It was not cow pie. It was this guy. It was a lone male water buffalo. And when Scar saw this, he suddenly kind of looked around very nervously, because these guys are notorious. He told me it could be anywhere in the shrubs. We wouldn't see it. They'll just lay there very quietly. If you come too close, they'll run out and trample you. And he says they're even known that when they're drinking at a water hole, they'll just kind of ignore you. And they know that you're coming closer. And when you get close enough, they chase you, and it's a nasty thing, those water buffalo. So this was as we left the Okavango, these other people were coming in and going on their safari. Just an incredible experience. very close to the Okavango is this game reserve called Marimi. And part of our trip was to go here. And so we were driving through incredible flat areas of buffalo grass in our safari vehicle. We weren't in the canoe this time. And we got to see some beautiful wildlife. He told us it was a four-wheel drive. It didn't work out. It was more of a two-wheel drive. But this is our accommodation. This is our camp. And the wildebeest, the elephants, the zebra, the giraffe, they're all just roaming all around us. There's the wildebeest. There's the buffalo, the water buffalo, giraffes. It was incredible. We're just right in the heart of this wildlife. Elephants would come visiting. In fact, one night, Jan said she heard something in our tent. And you know, Scar had told us the same thing. You don't get out of your tent at night. Well, in the morning, we looked, and sure enough, there was a huge elephant footprint right beside our tent. And the elephant had come by and, I guess, checked us out. So, beautiful, beautiful opportunity to take some photographs. But you know, this is what the accommodation was like. It was a little bit rough, I thought. But it was adequate. But you know, in the back of this, you can see another tarp there. That's the biffy, or the loo. All they do is they dig a hole in the ground and then they put this thing above it. But you can see it's all screened in around. Well, that's because you can do your business at night and none of the lions, hyenas, elephants are really going to notice that you're there. Just the tarp like that. And I kept thinking, boy, I sure hope they don't. Maybe they're listening. Maybe they realize something inside there. But you know, this is what the shower looks like. And they fill it with warm water, and then there's a thing at the spigot at the bottom. You turn it on, and you get your shower. And so Baker told us this story. He said one day they were on safari like this, and a woman came out of her tent naked, running towards him. And he thought, wow, maybe she really likes my cooking. But it wasn't that at all. She was running because she said she was taking a shower, and all of a sudden there was no water, and she looked up, and there was an elephant's trunk. And the elephant had sucked all the water out of her shower. But it scared her so much she went running naked out. Well, Baker thought that was pretty neat, actually. Well, now a complete change in scenery. This is the Private Game Reserve right beside Kruger, Naledi, and that was our accommodation in the Private Game Reserve. Well, you know, you're paying for that kind of comfort, but compared to the tent, it was kind of a nice level of comfort. And every day we had to wake up around 4:30, and there was no sleeping in. You had to get up, have a quick coffee and a donut, whatever, get into the jeeps at 5 o'clock because we had to be at the watering hole when the wildlife was there at sunrise. I thought, geez, you know, what kind of holiday is this? But we were up at Adam every morning. And they also had a really nice pool, which Jan enjoyed. And it was right on the river. And at night, it was this most amazing sound of hippos partying at night. I don't know. I can't really describe it. If anyone's heard it, it's a funny kind of it's party time for the hippos. So this is where this Private Game Reserve. It's right on the edge of Kruger National Park. And as I mentioned, there's the boundary, but it's unfenced. So the wildlife gets to go back and forth, and you get all the big game in Balule, in Naledi. The nice thing about these places is there is an electric fence, but it's around us. So I guess it's kept closed. We did go off for a little walking safari, but they had the rifle with us as we were walking. The only scary thing we saw were baboons. And in one of my lectures, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about baboons. But this is what we would be doing. First thing in the morning, heading off and heading off to the watering hole. Now, the thing about this private game reserve, they just follow the wildlife, and they know exactly where the herd of elephants are, where the pride of lions are. And so that's the one thing that I would say. The private game reserve, we had the opportunity to get much closer to wildlife, too close in some cases, but you can see here there's just us in the Jeep, the driver, and the tracker. And if they knew there was a lion pride at the watering hole, they just basically drove there. And we got in very close. It was the best place to get photographs of lions that I've ever experienced. And it was like we were part of the family. Old Dad would come along, and the kids are playing in the tree. And it was just amazing kind of wildlife viewing. In fact, a couple of times when we were sharing the Jeep, there were other photographers, and they had really big lenses. And they'd say, "Hey, I can't focus. The lion's too close." And I was quite happy because I had my zoom lens, and I could take care of any kind of distance. But you know, there were times when I was wondering, how much did they pay that guy? The tracker. Because the tracker sits there. Doesn't matter how close they are. Lions can literally be walking by less than a foot away from him, and he's sitting there. And then elephants. Wow, I don't know. They don't suffer from nervousness, these fellows, the trackers. But they do an amazing job of finding the wildlife. And they, after several days in Naledi, in this game reserve, we had not seen the water buffalo. And the water buffalo travel in big herds. So they asked me, "Well, is there anything you'd still like to see?" And I said, "Well, it's our last day. We'd really love to see the water buffalo." So we went on a Ferrari safari. And you'll hear this term. When the guides radio one another and they know that there's something to show people, they take off. And boy, you hang on to your hat because it's a Ferrari. But that's how you get to see some of the wildlife up close. And to get some of these kind of photos that I think are very memorable of a trip to this private game reserve. So, if you're keen on the wildlife, that's the way to go, I would say. Now, I'm going to switch to the third place, which is Kruger National Park itself. And the neat thing about Kruger is that it's a national park where you can hire your own car, rent a car, and drive into the park. You set your own schedule. They have beautiful highways within the national park. It's a huge area. It's one of the largest game reserves, but then you consider all these adjacent private game reserves which are attached. It's just under the size of Belgium. It's a huge area. And you get to drive around in your own personal rented vehicle and see the wildlife. So some amazing photography in Kruger. It's close, relatively close to Johannesburg. We've done this in the past where we fly to Johannesburg and then you can drive. It's about a 5-6 hour drive. I actually prefer to fly to a place called Nelspruit. Nelspruit is just on the gates outside of Kruger, and from there you can rent a car and easily within an hour and a half, you're in the national park. And the very first time we went to Kruger, this is within 5 minutes of entering the gate, we ran across this family of elephants drinking at a river right there. I just couldn't believe it, how this scene was unfolding right there before our eyes. Well, I turned off my engine so I could get photographs. And I like to take videos. And I don't like the sound of the engine. Well, we learned that that's not what you do. You're supposed to keep the engine running because you can see the matriarch and the younger elephants. They came up onto the road and crossed in front of us, in front of our vehicle. And they were fine. But then the teenager came at the very end. He was a teenage male elephant. And when they're a couple of years old, they get ostracized from the family. And the matriarch actually tries to push away the young male, and he has to go off and join a group of single males. And they form all sorts of trouble, like little motorcycle gangs. So this young male, they're frustrated. They're a little upset because mom and the family are trying to push them out. And he looked at us and he gave us that. And you know how you can communicate with animals. He gave us that look like, don't you mess with me. And he shook his head and his trunk and he snorted at us. And I wish I'd had my engine running. Because at that stage, I didn't want to turn the engine on in case it frightened him with the noise. But we should have backed away quietly. Well, we were lucky. Because the elephants in Kruger are wild elephants. And sometimes they have to do stuff like this for belly rubs or whatever. It's just, you do have to be cautious that you don't mess with the elephants particularly. I've actually seen, if you go to YouTube and look for videos of interactions, you'll see crazy things like a car's driving along, an elephant is sort of standing in the road, and someone will honk their horn. No way. The elephant doesn't put up with it. They literally took their trunk and they just capsized this, sort of shoved it off into the ditch with the people inside of it. So you do have to be cautious of the elephants. But other than that, you're driving around and you see wildlife, you pull over, you get the most incredible chance to do a little photography. Within Kruger, there's a series of rest camps, they're called. And these are enclosures with an electric fence, and you have to be there by 5:30 or 6 inside the enclosure every day in the evening. And it's a tricky thing, if sometimes when you enter the gate, you really have to make a calculation. It's a big distance, and are you going to get to the camp in time before the gates closed? So this is always a calculation the first day that you get to Kruger. But you can see there's accommodation, and I'll show you one of the huts that we stayed in. This is the biggest one, Skukuza. And some people say, well, it's too big. They have a laundromat, they have a general store, swimming pools, tennis courts. But one thing I really do like about Skukuza is the river. And you can see along the top. So there's a beautiful walk along the river. And you're on the inside of the electric fence, but just on the other side is the river and all the wildlife. There's tremendous opportunities to see wildlife, monkeys and crocodiles in the river, and birds all around. So we do like Skukuza because of this. Some of the rest camps are much smaller, and you can't really walk around. And the thing is about Kruger is you're in your car most of the time. You can't just step out anywhere. So it's nice to have a bit of a place to walk around, I find. And this is the river view along the river, and there's places to sort of benches to sit and admire the view. Now this is the cabin or the hut that you rent, and these are very reasonable. They're roughly about $150 US a night, but they're fully self-contained. They have this outdoor kind of a kitchen. In some cases it's indoors, but it's everything you need to prepare your meals. There's a barbecue outside. The monkeys really look forward to people having barbecues. And you go inside, and they're basic. They're basic huts. There's nothing extravagant, but everything you need is there. A couple of beds, washroom, and very comfortable. So I think this makes it very affordable. If you rent a car, you have to reserve these places well ahead, though, at least 6 months to a year. You go onto the National Park website, and if you search a little bit, you'll find the really good ones are close to the gate, or close to the fence, I mean, because you can actually sit, you get a little veranda, and you can look outside on the other side of the fence. And there's several of these rest camps. Well, Kruger, I think, gave us one of our best opportunities anywhere to see elephants up close and personal. And this was taken from a hide. And you have, there aren't too many, but there are places where you can get out of your car and you walk down this kind of a walkway which is covered so the leopards and the lions don't see you. And you go to this kind of a place, and it's an open hide looking out onto the watering hole. And the elephants show up. And there you are once again. It's like you're witnessing the entire elephant family doing their thing. Just beautiful, beautiful photography. So pretty soon you'll realize that these elephants are communicating at a pretty high level, that they're using body language. And you can almost tell exactly what's going on in their minds. It's a fascinating experience to be close to the elephant. And now with science, we're beginning to understand that they have complex forms of communication. And so they are communicating at a much higher level than we've ever thought of. So this is a photograph I took, and you can see how that elephant has his front foot sort of at an angle, and he has a very fleshy pad on the heel. And what he's doing is listening to infrasonic vibrations in the ground. And they can literally communicate through infrasonic communication in the ground from one herd to the next, many kilometers. Quite amazing. And they've done extensive studies now, and they realize we don't even have an understanding of how these animals are doing this. But you know, sometimes if you're close to an elephant, you'll hear a rumble. And it's like this deep, deep chesty, but it's, we're just hearing the bare top tones of that rumble. There's an infrasonic part that we can't hear that transmits through the ground. So the red line shows you the lower level of human hearing. But you can see they're making sounds below that level. And who knows, we're thinking that it's many kilometers that they can communicate. So if you have a chance to go to Kruger, you have experiences like this right from your own vehicle. You don't have other people around. Although I must say, the reason Kruger isn't great for lions is because as soon as a lion comes close to the road, you get a jam of lion watching people, taking photographs. If you can't, first of all, you can't drive because everyone's jamming up the roadway, and you can't get close enough to get pictures of the lion. So, but elephants are different. We managed to get some very good photographs of elephants. Now, this is in Kruger, and this is a big, big elephant. This is a big male, and he's in must. And that's when they have the hormones. And he's looking for a fight. And I was a little bit nervous. We were in a big safari vehicle. There were, I don't know, maybe 12 people. And the driver, the guide, she was saying, "Don't worry, we're bigger than it. It's not going to bother us." And I was a little bit nervous because you can see it's really irritated, flapping its ears. Well, we drove a little bit further along, and we ran across, it turned out that these people were trail crew working on the trails. And I guess they know a lot about elephants because they became very nervous. And you can see all of a sudden they're popping out of their vehicle, they're unhitching their trailer. That woman in the back has her rifle ready, and our driver is trying to calm them down. She's saying to them, "Look, you guys, just wait until it kind of backs away from the road." But they were very nervous, and these folks, they know elephants. So we had a pretty exciting time just to see what was happening. So I just want to finish with this thought that when we come to Africa and we go on these safaris and we do wildlife viewing, it is a huge boon to the economy. And I think we can really make a big difference in our travels by choosing the places we go and trying to spend our dollars by seeing living creatures, because then the locals really understand the value of having the living wildlife that is so close to them. So, with that, if you don't go on safari and you're going to Cape Town, you can very easily see the penguins just outside of Cape Town, on the Cape. A beautiful little national park. These are the African penguins. They're very used to people being around them. And so if you love wildlife, that's an opportunity right in Cape Town. That's the fish eagle, African fish eagle. I love that. It's like a celebratory note of wildlife in Africa. And a saying that really struck me, the eye that never forgets what the heart has seen. And with that, I just want to finish with a little video showing you some of our photographs from this wonderful place called Africa. Thank you very much for coming. Have a great time at sea. We'll see you next time. Thank you.